Hello and welcome once again. Thank you so much for staying with us through the entire morning program. Hope you really enjoyed it, of the second annual Social Justice Summit here at the Stellenbosch University. Thank you so much for staying with us. As I said, remember our media hashtags, hashtag MyFund, hashtag SDG10, and hashtag Social Justice. But also, some of our participants are really struggling with navigating the system. Remember to just go on to next, what does it say? I think it says, I'm not, all right, I missed that one a bit, but there's a process which you can go in. You click on next live session. Click on next live session and go in there, and you should be able to continue to interact with us. I hope you enjoyed all of that entertainment that we played for you during the break. The beautiful Stellenbosch choir bringing you amazing music there, and some videos reminding us of Johnny Clegg. May his soul rest in peace. Now, I'm very excited about our next speaker. She's really close to my heart. Kate Robertson is the co-founder of One Young World, the global forum for young leaders that identify, promote, and connect the world's most impactful activists to create a better world with more responsible and effective leadership. Kate, who can forget that time in 2013 when the train came to South Africa? It was such an amazing few days, and what I love about it is that we're able to go back and look at the young South Africans that you impacted on. I can think, off the top of my head of Smamkele Dlakavu, who's now playing a very important role at the University of Cape Town now, and Sizwe Mpofu, who's now, he's got a doctorate from Oxford. Can you believe it? Kate, before I get too excited, let me continue to tell our participants the annual One Young World Summit convenes the brightest young talent from every country and sector working to accelerate social impact. Delegates from 190 plus countries are counseled by influential political, business and humanitarian leaders such as Justin Trudeau, Paul Polman and Meghan Markle, amongst many other global figures. Kate was formerly the global president and UK group chairman of Havas Worldwide. In 2012, she was named the Advertising Woman of the Year by Women in Marketing, and in 2014 was similarly honored by Advertising Week Europe. In 2014, she received an honorary doctorate from the University of Lausanne, along with Unilever's Paul Polman. In 2017, Kate was awarded the Corporate Citizenship Award from British American Business. She's also the co-author of How to Make a Difference, the definitive guide from the world's most effective activists, a unique and practical guide to modern day activism, which includes advice and experience from some of the world's leading campaigners. And I should get that one. Kate, it's such an honor to have you here. I remember those years, running up to the time you came to South Africa, and we were working together for a good 2 years. And it was such a successful campaign. Welcome, and thank you so much. Please give us your contribution for today.
Thank you so much for having me here. Yes, that was a wonderful days, and these wonderful young South African leaders, along with my generation, the old guard, sadly passed now, Ahmed Kathrada, also Mampele Rampele, Francois Pienaar, and if you remember at the very end, a sudden unscheduled appearance of Mama Africa, crying Amandla Uwe to the South Africans, and the rest of the world going, these South Africans, wow. So thank you for having me here. It's an honor. On this day, the 4th of November in the year 2020, I would like to put forward 2 points in the interests of social justice and the context today of the M plan, the Musa plan. I state the date because I believe that this is a day to reckon honestly with democracy and a fault line that has always existed but is becoming increasingly apparent and must be acknowledged. It is a fault line that exists because it is a fact. It does not live in theory or even policy, and it is a fact about people. It is people that make up our democracies, not systems. people. People lead and are led, and this is done by communicating with individuals and with the masses. This brings me to my first point. There has always been communication between leaders and the people, between government and the electorate. And these days, interestingly, the people talk back, and not just at elections, but constantly. Those who would make change, whether change to the good or change to the bad, must master the art of communicating with the people, with words that they, the people, understand and that move them, the people. In many democracies around the world, the evidence is plain. People can be led en masse just by words. This seems simplistic, but in deriding this simplicity and choosing to move on with our better educated, better informed arguments of increasing complexity, we are quite simply failing in all directions. And I say we, I include myself. Just a quick example. Look at this. New Zealand is having a good pandemic. If there's such a thing, theirs is good. It was easier there. An island state, a small population relatively. But I urge you to look very carefully at the communications of its very young Prime Minister. Clear, simple, unifying, immaculate, masterful, and delivering her and her party of a majority they've never seen in New Zealand's history. The same can be said of the communications delivered by successful politicians. I didn't say successful governments, successful politicians in much larger democracies. In terms of simplicity and clarity, the same can be said. These are communications that weren't unifying, but they got those people exactly what they wanted. For example, the Brexit role in the United Kingdom. Take back control. And we none of us derided the message of the 2008 US presidential election. Simple, clear, unifying, yes. Because we better educated, better informed elites liked the candidate. Barack Obama's brilliant cry of hope, yes we can, swept up the whole world in optimism. The messages of the 2016 election on the other side were not unifying, but equally clear and simple, and also delivered by a charismatic leader. Lock her up, drain the swamp. And the point here, made as simply as I can, by way of a signpost to the necessary tools for delivering the M plan, is this. If the aim of the M plan of social justice for all cannot be communicated in a way that the least educated can grasp, and the most educated is prepared to actually believe, then the M plan will not be delivered. It cannot be. Democracy demands clear and simple communication in order for the people to endorse it. Now, let's address the fault line. Let's walk up to the edge of the 1,000-foot deep chasm that we ignore at the peril of our democracies. On one side, the individual, the self, and on the other, society, the collective. I posit that this is a chasm because we have made it a chasm. Yes, society, on the one hand, is made up of people, but the very second we choose, and it is a choice, to deny the existence of self-interest of the individual, we are sliding into the darkness of that chasm. Self-interest is an immense and powerful and undeniable force in history, and we need to get on with dealing with it and facing it as a fact. In many of the more populist democracies, the liberal elites, and I guess that includes me, have ranged themselves on the side of the chasm that is the collective, society. Business, the corporate world, in my lifetime, certainly since the financial crisis of 2008, have ended up on the other side, that of self-interest. Society, good. Business, bad, to put it simply. And then ask yourselves, who is it that really thrived? On which side of the chasm is there winning? It is the self-interest side. It is business. Do I think this is a fair assessment of business and their leaders? No, not entirely fair. Are businesses self-interested? Yes. Do they really care about the societies in which they operate? Actually, some do. And here's the thing. So my first point is about the need for clarity, simplicity in communicating around social justice, the M plan. Here is my second point. The collective side of the chasm may not care for capitalism. Fair enough. But without capital, there can be no progress for the collective. The majority collective in China has thrived for the last 25 years. Never in human history have so many people been lifted out of poverty. They've thrived on the capital derived from their hardworking masses, employed and paid by businesses. In the majority, business, no longer the state. Not for nothing did the successive governments of China semi-privatize government organs that could provide jobs and capital. But we're not dealing with China. No democracy there. Let's move west from there to the economic powerhouse that is Germany. Saved post-war by the Marshall Plan. US philanthropy in action? Yes and no. Certainly a concern by the US government for the collective of Europe. But provision of enormous amounts of capital derived from the taxes on the capitalist giants of the US economy. That is how the Marshall Plan was funded. Today, governments of all stripes in Germany work seamlessly with the power of the collective in the form of Germany's mighty trade unions. These are not two forces ranged against one another in that country, but two extremely complex organs, united for the good of the collective, with the self-interest of neither denied, nor the interest of business, nor the interest of government, nor the interest of the people is denied. In many ways, similarly, governments and businesses work together seamlessly in the incredibly successful Nordic countries of Europe. And arguably the same can be said for Canada. So, if we look at the chasm and acknowledge that it exists, the fact is that bridging it is possible, is being done by successful countries who really are taking care of the collective. So, the M plan for social justice itself is well structured, I would argue, and certainly intellectually sound. But I would also argue that with South Africa's commercial enterprises put at its heart, in every possible instance, the plan might succeed. Yes, it will have to overcome decades of deliberately complex, obfuscating, anti-business rhetoric in public communications. The collective, the people, will need to know exactly what is in it for them in the M plan, what is in it for them as individuals, jobs, affordable healthcare, homes, the things that we all want. Only a brilliantly well-funded M-plan can deliver. And whether it is deriving its funds directly from the state, those funds from the state are taxes which come from people paying taxes who have jobs and come from businesses, or the M-plan is directly funded from corporate funds, but the money, the capital, has to come from somewhere. And in these days, it almost has to be self-generated. The endless lending and gifting of the IMF, the World Bank, and other financial institutions cannot continue in a world addled by the debt caused by the pandemic. And this debt will last as long as that of the post-Second World War European debt. And I know that it's said that the M-plan is too ambitious. There's no such thing as too ambitious. Social justice itself is hugely ambitious and not delivered in many countries around the world. But it's only possible where leaders like Jacinda Ardern, like the Nordic leaders, are prepared to bestride the chasm between business on the one hand, self-interest if you like, and government and civil society on the other. And if the communication of the value of the work of both, the value of the work of government, the value of the work of business, if only to provide the taxes the fiscus requires, if the value of work of both is not clearly and simply communicated, young people will continue to condemn business and its power, and you see this with some of the brilliant emerging young leaders in the United States. They condemn business and its power. That's never going to work in the United States, and we are seeing this tragically play out today. The collective will continue to suffer poverty and extreme poverty. There is no other way. The economically disenfranchised of the world and in South Africa will continue to follow terrible populist leaders who cannot deliver to anyone's self-interest but their own. But they are followed by the economically disenfranchised out of desperation, because we, the liberal intellectual elites, continue to fail to communicate simply and clearly, and continue to fail to embrace the power of the capital engine that is commerce and that is business. So I would argue here, if you take the M-plan and its huge ambition, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations are themselves only a framework, and an ambitious one for the whole world. But the funding thereto is coming a lot from the corporate world, and particularly those countries where the corporate world works hand in glove with government in the interest of the collective. The Sustainable Development Goals have been set back on their heels and set back a long way by the pandemic. Every country, and you know this in South Africa, is suffering terrible deprivation. But it is only by putting business at the heart of this M-plan, along with government and civil society, that the funding is going to be in place, and it's going to take funding. But we have to remember that for all the current travails of the South African economy, South Africa remains an extremely rich country, rich in its arable land, rich in its continued wealth of mineral resources, richest of all in its absolutely brilliant, ambitious, self-interested peoples who have a right to their self-interest, who have a right to jobs and healthcare and homes and the benefits of a profitable partnership between government and business. So is the plan achievable? Yes. Is social justice achievable? South Africa is the country where almost the terminology of social justice was born by Madiba. So that is my take on this. Is it achievable? Yes. Where will young people be in this? They will be trying, my young South African leaders, trying with all their hearts, minds, and bodies. But they are nothing and nowhere if this divide continues to be delivered between the sources of capital and the needs of the collective. Thank you for hearing me out today. I hope this is useful, and that even if you don't agree, I hope at least you can find the argument to come back, as this was a simple argument, which is needed, a simple argument and simple communication to deliver social justice. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much there to Kate Robertson. I'm just sitting here smarting because I took in every word, saying there that social justice is a very ambitious project, but it needs to be achieved in our lifetime, and calling on the elite to support the M plan. Kate Robertson was speaking about the role that can be played by the corporate and social investment sector and young social justice people in integrating the post-COVID-19 recovery program with the SDG Quest, focusing on how the M plan weaves this together. Co-founder of One Young World. Thank you so much for that amazing message. But now, Claire Shine was appointed Vice President and Chief Program Officer of the Salzburg Global Seminar in 2012. She's responsible for the multi-year program strategy, design, partnership and implementation in Salzburg and around the world, next generation leadership development, communications and marketing, and the Salzburg Global Fellowship, which straddles nearly 170 countries. How impressive is that? Prior to joining Salzburg Global, Claire worked for from 1990 to 2011 as an independent environmental lawyer and policy expert for intergovernmental organizations, national governments and private sector and NGOs. Her work and publications focused on biodiversity and sustainable development, climate change, international trade, global and cross-border governance and cooperation, coastal and oceans policy, and conflict transformation. Claire has played an influential role in global biosecurity and biodiversity policy development, working as legal advisor to the World Bank, the European Union, the Council of Europe and African governments, and led environmental capacity building projects across 4 continents. Claire is a UK qualified barrister, an associate of the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and a member of the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law, and a bilingual French speaker and professional facilitator. She began her career in industry, working in the media and publishing sector with responsibility for marketing and new ventures. She's also a professional journalist who was the Financial Times theatre critic in France from 2001 to 2011. She holds a master's in English literature from Oxford University, UK, and postgraduate degrees from London University and the
that Julie Madoncella and her team have developed. I'm really delighted to be with you in spirit and across the ether today. One second remark, we at Salzburg Global Seminar have now embedded the Sustainable Development Goals across the whole of our program portfolio, whether we're working with Indigenous peoples and refugees on the future of education, or whether we're working with the leaders of finance and global peace builders. And again, I think that resonates very closely with our topic today. So I'm going to speak briefly with 4 key foci. First, briefly, is the context for action for social change. My topic is winning minds for social change. So then I'm going to focus on whose minds, what institutions and individuals are we talking about? And then how do we win those minds? And finally and briefly, just a few reflections very personally on the role and responsibility of the university today in leading this movement for social change. So firstly, the context for action on social change. We are right now at a nexus of converging crises and opportunities. Even pre-COVID, as you know better than me, economic, social, and racial divisions were driving political, cultural, and media polarization. COVID obviously is acting as a threat multiplier, but it is not the only one. Many will talk of a triple pandemic of COVID, climate, and inequity or injustice played out across economic, gender, racial, and other divides. Collective action problems need collective solutions, whether we're talking about global public goods like climate, the knowledge economy, financial systems, biodiversity, and so on, or whether we're looking at the rule of law and functioning institutions. I think underpinning this is of the huge importance of national and social cohesion. If we are to channel individualism and institutional individualism to foster real social solidarity for a reset, then we need to understand the roles and responsibilities of different institutions, including the state, to be the champion-in-chief of human flourishing. These challenges, of course, aren't being addressed as we stand still. The landscape is moving very fast, whether that's the fourth industrial revolution, radically transforming the future of work, or the biodigital technological revolution, which is happening around us in ways that we really don't see and probably don't very much understand. The word COVID dividend is for many not a popular term, but I like it because I think it helps us to focus on the accelerated capacity of the pandemic. We are seeing a lot of hashtags, build back better, or as I prefer, build forward better. And we need to deploy that post-COVID regeneration for the Sustainable Development Goals and not see the immediate economic and societal crisis as a reason to take our foot off the pedal or to dilute our focus. Whether that relates to the digital divide, to decarbonizing our businesses and our economies, to making our food systems genuinely sustainable and equitable, or for reinventing school models, the way we test, the way we teach, and what we are testing and teaching for in this fast-changing world. In all of that, South Africa has a huge advantage, apart from being the most wonderful country. It has the youth dividend. The world has entered the aging curve. Many countries in the global north in particular are very worried indeed about their fast aging societies. And whilst a country like South Africa is of course already itself on its aging trajectory, you have extraordinary youth and innovation capacity at your service. And I think that's something to celebrate. So moving on to the question of whose minds, which institutions and individuals are levers for this kind of social change? As you know, the Sustainable Development Goals are incredibly comprehensive as well as bold. They require us by 2030 to renegotiate a social contract between or around systems, individuals, and institutions. The Sustainable Development Goals don't reference some key things like race, like culture. But for me, my entry point more and more is how do we collectively build a shared culture of sustainability? Because as history shows us, and as all of you in your different disciplines will know, it's when you have mindset shift or a readiness in society or a particular discipline to embrace new ways of thinking and acting that you start to see lasting change happen at scale and be copied in other locations. So how can we drive change when risks are rising and trust across society is at an all-time low? And how can we act smarter and faster for more equitable and sustainable societies? Currently, we organise our lives and our societies in pretty linear ways. We have silos, whether that's within universities, within corporate departments, within government ministries, or the whole way we think about line management and line budgets. At one level, we have to do it that way to stay sane and to keep things manageable. It's also what we're trained to do. But when we flip the lens and we look across the divides at where there can be win-wins, multiplier benefits of new approaches, then I get excited, but I also see a lot of potential. And that ability to flip the lens can be seen against a bigger backdrop, which is a paradigm shift around people and power. You will know better than me that enabled by technology, the whole contract we have with those who influence us, those who rule us, those for whom we vote, the way money is spent, all of those aspects that we have previously taken for granted will be changing in future years. Many countries already have begun participatory budgeting. The voice of the citizen will have new reach and new legitimacy as we go forward. And that again is fundamental to understanding how we can win minds. So we need new collaborative paradigms. No single institution or set of stakeholders can solve this by themselves. In my own work, a very useful question I find, whatever the topic, whatever the person I'm chatting with, is who don't you know how to talk to? There's no right answer. It's a listening question, but it's very revealing because often people who are very well-meaning, whether they're top leaders on the front pages of our newspapers or change makers in the streets, can feel very lonely or unsure how to talk about the things where they're stuck or that they don't understand. And I suggest that we should not underestimate that loneliness, the challenge of being a true entrepreneur. And changing the culture so that people can understand the power of cross-learning is already a very important and authentic step forward for winning minds. It's a way of acting non-transactionally and again to get these multiplier benefits. So I feel in a great position in this agenda because I'm sandwiched between experts in law reform, corporate social investment and business. And they're a very important part of the who. When we think about fast, comprehensive change, we need to connect in a non-judgmental way the people who currently run the system, and I say that completely neutrally. I mean the people who right now, around their board tables, around their cabinet tables, around their mayoral offices, influence how millions, if not billions, will be spent, or the rules and laws that will shape lives for future generations. So in addition to leaders in board governance, in finance, in public sector strategy, we need to think about those who are reinventing or designing the whole future of technology, bearing in mind that technology can be an incredible force for good, but that there are also issues and risks around techno-colonization, the issue of accountability, of fair payment in taxes, and so on. So our compact with technology will be, and those who develop and design and run technology, will be a very important part of how we win minds for social change. Universities and educators are critical as part of the minds that we need to win, but so are entrepreneurs, disruptors, new voices, and of course political representatives at local to international levels. In terms of levers for change, I've been doing a lot of recent work around corporate governance with corporate leaders, and all of them in our conversations are seeing COVID as a wake-up call and an accelerator. As one said to me, we can no longer unsee systematic risk. But that opens to them new opportunities to engage and to embrace what Jeff Mulgan would call collective intelligence. As I mentioned, the operating ecosystem for business, finance and governments is changing extraordinarily fast, and smart leaders know that they need to harness demand from within as well as from outside. So expectations are changing in the marketplace, We only have to look at climate investment as one example, from employees, from public scrutiny, and with the power of the internet for the public to be ever better informed. At the same time, there is friction in the system. When we talk about whose minds, we need to understand that a lot of the energy for change is, I would suggest, blocked or diluted. Many mainstream institutions and sectors seem afflicted by short-termism or institutional inertia. For example, the way we currently measure success, the way we measure results, is pretty short term. Sometimes we hear it called the tyranny of metrics. So companies have quarterly reporting. Very few CEOs have yet gone for a longer term view. Elected politicians are subject to electoral cycles. It seems pretty topical as we think of what's happening in the US today. And even in a sector like philanthropy, it's much easier for a philanthropist to measure success in terms of numbers of new toilets or vaccinations than on complex, messy matters like gender justice or racial equity. And so co-opting the energy from without and listening to change makers within institutions is fundamental to laying foundations and readiness for bolder change. So to my third point, how can we try to win minds for social change? I talked before about flipping the lens, and I like also to think about bring down that wall. How do we change the barriers to entry, bring down the fear factor of engaging collaboratively in change? One aspect, I think, is to know your audience and to be ready to change the messaging. Many people who lead their field in academia or in business are highly technical. They're highly specialist. That's why they've succeeded in many cases. But that same expertise can for some be a barrier or even exclusionary. It can also be manipulated. I come from the United Kingdom, where in the Brexit referendum, politicians said the people have had enough of experts. And we've seen through the COVID pandemic some repeated discrediting of data, evidence, and science for goals that do not serve social change and communal well-being. So we need to, if in appropriate situations, to change the entry point for our narratives, more relevance, more accessibility. How do we imagine a future that is not currently the one on offer? And how can we use smart storytelling to map different political and social and economic futures? For the world of the university, I think that can involve being open to new creative lenses and different levers. A multidisciplinary university has incredible assets on its doorstep in its creative departments that may not be involved in this process, but can help us to think differently about the way in which people are moved to make change. We can also be open to what behavioral and neuroscience are teaching us, to new disciplines like influencer marketing, and to be observant about where unexpected champions for change may be coming from. It's easy now for us to look at somebody like Greta Thunberg, who launched the Fridays for the Future movement, but nobody saw a pigtail schoolgirl being a lever of change. In your societies close or further away, there will be people as yet invisible who are capable of, I don't want to say speaking truth to power, but of persuading at a whole different scale. A couple of brief examples of ways we can flip the lens. One relates to collective sector leadership. Spectatorship, being passive, can take many forms, but so can being active, the courage to be a first mover. Not every change maker is wearing a hero's costume. When George Floyd was killed in the United States, the whole world saw a movement in the streets around Black Lives Matter. But what has interested me is the different ways in which different societies, because every society has its deep patterns of historical and structural injustice. In South Africa, you don't need me to remind you of that. Not every society and every sector can find its own pathways to put a spotlight on its own practices and its own commitment to change. So I mentioned that we work on corporate governance, and I learned just recently that after the George Floyd killing, the 12 top General Counsel for the world's 12 top private banks came together informally to develop an open letter to the global legal community about what private sector institutions and banks could do themselves. And that document, which is public, looked at internal action, external supplier engagements, and social action efforts. Now, those institutions influence trillions. So it's just one example of how the quiet people, mostly men in grey suits, were also themselves realizing that they too could be changing their own minds and helping to lead a movement for change. My second example about movement building really goes to this critical need for much bolder interdisciplinary thinking and changing the lens. Because of COVID, we're all thinking about health. And we've talked for a long time about health in all policies, but it doesn't necessarily capture the imagination. When we look out at the world over the next 30 years, so even beyond the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that the world will urbanize. About 3/4 of the world's population will live in urban centers. Most of that new urban growth will happen in the global south, and that means that there are billions, if not trillions, still to be spent on the new or expanded cities of tomorrow. We also know that no society, rich or poor, has figured out how to pay for physical and mental health, for social care, and to promote well-being across its societies and economies. And thirdly, we know that in terms of climate, we talk much more about climate now than we do about nature. And yet nature is a source of solutions if we don't screw it up. It's a source of economic savings, and nature-based solutions can be one of the most important issues, both for human well-being in cities and for climate resilience. So we are proud at Salzburg Global Seminar to be directly involved with the new National Park Cities movement across the world. And I was proud to be alongside the Mayor of London to launch London as the world's first national park city, which is participatory and which takes as its mantra, greener, healthier, wilder. And my last comment on that, it goes directly to equity and social change, because we know from all the data that in cities, poverty is a threat multiplier. During COVID and before COVID, the people who had the least access to healthcare, good housing, green space, and safe outdoor play were, of course, the poorest. Flipping the lens, putting investments to use for all can have the multiplier benefits I've just mentioned. So in closing, in my last minute, back to the big picture, the role and the power of universities. You know, I know, big ideas like the Sustainable Development Goals can shape societies for decades, and universities are the incubator for those big, bold ideas. Currently, we're living in an age of anti-intellectualism and culture wars, and that's extremely worrying and it's high risk. Leaders and students at universities can help to redress that trend, to help to redress the generational divide, which is at terrifying proportions, and really play a leading role in radical reinvention. The M Plan and the M Fund are a really good stake in the ground in that respect. I wish you a fantastic day of debates, and in particular that this initiative can bear fruit. And with that, thank you so much, and I will pass back over to our Mistress of Ceremonies.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. And how about that beautiful message there from Claire Shine, who's the Vice President and Chief Program Officer for the Salzburg Global Seminar. Thank you very much for that beautiful message. Claire, remember, you're still watching the second annual Social Justice Summit here at the Stellenbosch University, and we thank you very much for taking part today. Now, our next speaker is known for being the all-the-way lady, very passionate, not only about the work she does and the quality thereof, but also about the country. Busisiwe Mavuso, she's a chartered certified accountant, qualified with the Association of Certified Chartered Accountants in the UK, and holds a master's degree in business leadership, a postgraduate qualification in management from Gibbs, and a BComt in accounting from the University of South Africa. She's the Chief Executive Officer at the Business Leadership South Africa, an independent association of the leaders of some of South Africa's biggest and most well-known organizations, a forum for engaging key players, including civil society and labor, to exchange ideas in the national interest and to create effective dialogue with government and other stakeholders. She's also a non-executive director on the board of ESCOM, Business Unity South Africa, BUSA, and Resultant Finance, also a PIC investee company, and serves on the Human Resources Development Council. She was previously the Chief Operating Officer for Business Leadership South Africa. Prior to that, the Managing Director of the Black Management Forum, a very important role player in business, during which she was responsible for driving the overall strategy of the organization, including its representation of various public forums at the request of the BMF President or Deputy President. Before assuming this role, Busi served as the Chief Financial Officer and Operations Director of the BMF, having joined in May 2009. She started her career in finance in 1995 and over the last 25 years has had experience in a range of industries ranging from training, consulting, telecoms and healthcare sectors. Ms. Mavuso, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You may begin with your presentation.
And thank you very much, to the foundation for inviting me to come and have this conversation with yourselves. And I think I've had this conversation many a times with Professor Thulima Donsela, and I really appreciate the efforts, that she is making to ensure that we really continue to drive the social justice agenda in this country. So I'm very glad to share my views at this second annual Social Justice Summit under the theme All Hands on Deck, to leave no one behind in the post-COVID-19 recovery agenda. We are interestingly having this conversation during a critical time when we as the world are confronted with what we last saw in the late 30s during the Great Depression. We have been thrown one of the most wicked curveballs in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think what makes it more wicked in our case is that it found us at our weakest as a country. Most of you will remember that the economic outlook for 2020 was already bleak at the beginning of the year, with a projected 0.3% growth. And at the beginning of October, we also posted very bleak unemployment data, where we recorded 2.2 million jobs lost in the second quarter of the year. This after the shocking quarter two annualized 51% negative economic growth. So in approximately just 7 months, COVID-19 has unraveled much of the progress that we have made as a country over the last 25 years, and it has definitely exacerbated the weaknesses of the last 10 years. And unfortunately, what all of this means is that the deprivation for the majority of South African citizens has just intensified. So if the plan is to have all hands on deck to leave no one behind in the post-COVID recovery agenda, it means the interventions that we need to put in place ought to be those which will drive the inclusivity agenda that has been elusive for us as a country, for the past 26 years and definitely before that. Now, from a business perspective, what we need to answer is, what ought to be our role in integrating the post-COVID recovery program with the SDG quest, which is the topic that I've been asked to address this morning. So if we agree that the aim of the SDGs in the main is to end poverty, then we should certainly be concerned as business that we're sitting in the country with poverty levels of 55%. While our unemployment sits at 30% in terms of the narrow definition and 40% in terms of the expanded definition, with more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape, with youth unemployment at 57%, then as business, we certainly have our work cut out for us in as far as ensuring that the integration of the post-COVID recovery program with the SDG quest is definitely achieved. Now, here's my thinking in terms of what we need to be focusing on and what it is that we need to do as business from this perspective. You see, if our interventions aimed at post-COVID recovery as business do not have as the ultimate goal the changing of the structure of the South African economy, then we certainly need to go back to the drawing board. You see, countries that will quickly bounce back from the devastation of the COVID-19 crisis are those with diamond structures, where you have 10% of the citizens that are actually opulent or rich, 80% which are actually in the middle class, and 10% which are poor. Because you see, it is the middle class that carries economies, not the rich. So let's agree that our pyramid economic structure as South Africa of 10% opulent, 40% middle class, and the bottom 50% subjected to abject poverty is fundamentally flawed. Surely we have to agree that having only 1.7 million people paying 80% of the income tax does not help our case as a country. Let's agree that having overtaken Brazil as the most unequal society in the world undermines a post-COVID recovery program with the SDG quest. The current formula that we have in this country of having only 7 million people earning enough to pay as you earn and 18 million people dependent on some form of social grant or the other should certainly be unacceptable. Why? Because such injustices are bad for business. They are bad for economics, and they definitely don't make any moral sense. You see, the biggest problem about such domestic inequality is that it undermines social stability. And unfortunately, when your neighbor is poor, then your wall cannot be high enough. And these are the considerations in looking at what interventions do we need to put in place as business to drive the post-COVID recovery program towards the SDG quest. These are the things that we need to take into account. Colleagues, I'm talking about what the role of business ought to be in this regard. And I'm sponsoring the view that whatever our interventions are as business, they have to be geared towards changing our economic structure, which is 10, 40, and 50 pyramid structure. And I'm saying that if our interventions are not geared towards changing our economic structure, then as business, we need to go back to the drawing board. Actually, if we work towards this and get it right as business, it will be self-serving for us because it means we would be investing in our future markets and in our sustainability. Because with a diamond-shaped economy, which is what we should be working towards attaining, with a diamond-shaped economy, you have more people who have disposable income and who can now afford to buy our goods and services. And because they now have the ability to buy our goods and services, then demand increases. And when demand increases, then we need to produce more. And if we need to produce more, then we need to hire more people. And if we need to hire more people, then unemployment decreases. But on the other side, having more people employed means that there's more people earning salaries. And if there's more people earning salaries, then there is more people paying taxes. And if there's more people paying taxes, then tax revenues increase. And if tax revenues increase, then there is more available to the fiscus. I think you get the drift, colleagues. I'm merely making a point, towards Economics 101. And I'm saying business driving the socio-economic transformation agenda and driving the SDG quest means that we are investing in our own sustainability, and it means we will be investing in our own future market. And just in case my business colleagues in the room are asking themselves why this is our problem as business, then the answer is simple. because ours as a country is an incomplete transition. The situation we are facing in the country right now is precisely because our transition as a country is incomplete. And if you agree that business is the only partner, social partner with disproportionate resources, then let's also agree that business ought to do more in driving a post-COVID recovery program with the SDG quest. Because you see, the economic vulnerability of some segments of society increases the vulnerability for all of us, because only business can do something to change, the income distribution in this country, where we have 10% of the population earning the 58% of income. And it's not just 10% of the population, the 10% that is actually sitting on top of the economic structure or on top of the pyramid are earning 58% of the income. The 40% who are in the middle class earn 35% of the income, and the bottom 50% earn less than 10% of the income. And I think let's not even get started about what the wealth distribution in this country looks like. So you see, as South African businesses, we have a special responsibility towards driving our socio-economic transformation agenda. And these things left unattended are a recipe for disaster, and they are definitely a recipe for anger and frustration. So the role we are being called upon to do as business is this notion that we discussed at WEF in January 2020 of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, or rather this notion of conscious capitalism. So how does business alter the lens through which it engages with these things towards that which is going to be geared towards conscious capitalism? And if we can answer this question, then it means we will be well on our way towards, driving a post-COVID recovery program that is geared towards an SDG quest. And I think as I draw to a close, Madam Facilitator and my colleagues, let me share with you the following conversation that I had with a colleague sometime last year. And we were reflecting on these issues of what the biggest pains are for South Africa at the moment. And he said, I worry that as a country, we have way too many people who have nothing to lose. He said, that's a dangerous space to be in as a country. He said, I remember when this was me as a young boy growing up in this country. He said, we would go out facing the police and the South African National Defense Force as young boys with sticks and stones, facing R1 rifles. He said, we knew that three things may happen. You may get shot, you may die, or you may actually get paralyzed. He said, but because we had nothing to lose, we didn't care. So let's agree that you don't want a country with so many people who have nothing to lose. Let's agree that when people have something to lose, they think before they act. Let's agree that when people have something to lose, they become measured and they become moderated. And that is what South Africa should be striving for. So I think that in answering the question of the role of business in driving, or rather in integrating a post-recovery program with the SDG quest, my answer, Madam Facilitator, is that the interventions that business ought to put in place in driving this recovery program ought to be those that are geared towards inclusivity, and definitely have to be those that are geared towards changing the pyramid economic structure that we have in this country. And I'd like to pause here. Thank you, Madam Facilitator, and thank you everyone for your indulgence.
Thank you again to the Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa, Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso there, who was telling us about the role of business in integrating the post-COVID-19 recovery program with the SDG Quest. Thank you so much for staying with us. It's been quite an amazing program throughout the day, the second annual Social Justice Summit. And let's bring in now our next speaker. Dr. Adrian Enthoven is the Executive Chairman of Yellowwoods, a private investment group. He's responsible for the African portfolio of insurance, hospitality and wine investments. Well, you can speak about wine when you're in Stellenbosch. He serves on the boards of the group's South African-based businesses, including chairing the Hollard Insurance Group. He's also involved in initiatives in COVID-19 youth employment, education, social justice, and the arts. He's the Deputy Chairperson of the Solidarity Fund. He serves on the board of Citizens SA, the African Leadership Initiative, Business Leadership South Africa, which we've just heard from, Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, the Youth Employment Services, yes, which is the presidential initiative, and a trustee of Spear Arts Trust, which is where we're coming from today, the WWF South Africa as well. He is the co-chair of the Millennium Labour Council and a member of the advisory boards of Mistra, CASAC, the African Center for CITES ACC, the World Bank Advisory Group, and the CDE, and an ambassador of the Social Justice Initiative. He is educated at Michael House School and at Oxford University with a BA in Politics, Philosophy and Economics and a PhD in Political Science. Thank you so much for making the time to take part in this conversation today. Very important conversation on social justice. You may start with your presentation.
Much and a big thank you to Professor Madonsela for inviting me to make my input at this very important summit. So, I mean, I think I really kind of pick up from where Busi left off in her input, in that, you know, business, I think, exists as a very significant resource in society that needs to be mobilized to help advance the SDGs and the vision that's contained in our constitution, and needs to be a full partner in delivering that vision. I mean, I've been asked to talk about our journey as an investment group and the way that we think about our role in bridging the poverty and equality gap. And that starts with, I think, two of the, you know, what we would think of as the two generational challenges that we face as a generation. And I think they've been well articulated at the summit. The first is the challenge of economic exclusion. The fact that very large swathes of the population, both in the developing world, particularly in South Africa, in the developing world and increasingly in the developed world, are excluded from the benefits of modernity, you know, more broadly, the benefits of dignified work, of being able to keep your family healthy, of adequate and decent housing, of education. And this issue of economic exclusion is something that kind of sits at the heart, I think, of the poverty and inequality challenge that has been discussed at the summit. That is a challenge that we collectively need to address ourselves to and to solve. The second generational challenge is the challenge of climate change. And I think it's important to recognize that these two challenges are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. The people that are most affected and impacted by climate change are not the wealthy. They're the marginalized and the poorest of the poor who suffer, whether it's crop losses of small-scale farmers, you know, the erratic weather events and the impact that has on people's houses and so on, floods, storms. I mean, these are the things that food insecurity, obviously, I mean, these are the things that are going to be increasingly become major disruptors and are, critical challenges for us to address. So at Yellowwoods, we really have kind of three pillars that we have adopted as our approach to think about how we can contribute to addressing these challenges. And the first of these is looking at levers that exist inside the businesses that we invest in. You know, so our approach has not been to outsource philanthropy or to outsource the kind of the impact or the responsibility of addressing these social justice challenges to third parties or to a foundation. It's something that is kind of core to the business, to our business itself. And there are lots of different ways in which different business groups have thought about, how do you build businesses in a way that also positively impacts society. The model that we like to use is a model of Richard Porter called shared value, which is really thinking about, where are the really significant opportunities for impact, positive impact in a business that is also going to be something that is strategic and core to the business. And this is something that we've kind of thought about through all of our investments. And I'm just going to point out a few of them. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the first and fundamental one for us is that before you do anything else, your responsibility as a business, in our view, if you're in a position to do so, is to pay a fair and living wage to people that work for you. If you are receiving the full time, all the working hours of an individual, of a worker, then you need to make sure that you remunerate that person with sufficient income that they can live a dignified life, and that wages is fair. And this is not about minimum wages. This is about, what is it that the people in the frontline workers in a business need to earn. And we've looked at this through all of our businesses, and it's obviously different in different areas in different countries. And we've extended this as well to contract workers. So where you have outsourced security companies, for example, or catering companies, or garden services, those people also need to be earning decent wages. And we have instituted a system of top-up site allowances that effectively allow contract workers across all of our businesses to earn what we consider to be a decent wage. So I think that is something which is kind of fundamental, and I think something that there's a whole living wage movement in South Africa, and I think this is something that's important for business to get behind. Obviously, I'm specifically referring to businesses that are able to. There are businesses that are not in a position, for whatever reason, to pay significantly above the minimum wage. But I think that businesses who are able to, have a responsibility to do so, and to think very carefully about what a living wage looks like. The second focus for us has been on inclusive employment, to say when we're employing particularly frontline workers in our businesses, how do we try to increase the pool of people we're employing from to include those people who are kind of most marginalized. The third area has been in supply chain. So we focused on, particularly with Nando's, for example, we used to procure all of the peri-peri for Nando's from a few large-scale suppliers. That has now changed, and all of the peri-peri for Nando's globally is procured from over 1,200 small-scale farmers. And that is something that obviously is critical to support livelihoods, and is also diversified supply. For Nando's, it really has been a project that has had extensive kind of social impact and benefit, and also has impacted the business. That also applies to the artist program. All art globally across Nando's restaurants across 25 countries all comes from emerging South African artists, and that's also now being applied to furniture and design and other items. And the idea of this as well is that how can we expand these kinds of programs that build local jobs and local economic activity to other businesses as well. And so we can start to kind of insource and localize a lot of these opportunities. We also look across in the wine farms at the grapes that are supplied to Spear, local procurement across and beyond lodges across the African continent. So supply chains is a huge opportunity for impact and for addressing the SDGs, and that's something we've been very focused on. On the issue of climate, I think all businesses really need, and this is a process that we've been going through with all of our businesses, is to commit to science-based targets for reducing carbon emissions. And where there are elements of their supply chain or energy usage that can't be reduced, like, for example, the carbon intensity of Eskom's energy, think about insetting or offsetting programs that can help to address that. But I think addressing carbon and climate change is absolutely critical, I think, for all businesses, and is something that requires, I think, a lot more focus, particularly in South Africa. And then finally, thinking about products. So, in financial services companies, What kinds of products are products that that will help people emerge out of poverty? You know, how do poor people use insurance, savings, credit products, and how do you make those products accessible and available to people in a way which is not just affordable, but is designed to help them emerge from poverty and help them from slipping back into poverty? Because managing cash flow on a daily basis is something that is critical for people who are trying to emerge out of poverty, and financial services companies have got a critical role to play in helping to support that process. I mean, I would say that in relation to our businesses, you know, this is a journey. It's not, I mean, I don't think you get to a point and say, you know, we've kind of solved all the problems, but I think it's a critical thing, both as an investment business and for the businesses that we invested in, that, you know, these are discussions that happen at board level and are kind of central to thinking about the strategy for the business, how executives are remunerated and incentivized, and is a journey that we are committed to continue on. The second pillar of our approach has been to think about, you know, what are the big obstacles, what are the big challenges or problems that limit inclusion in society, and what might our role be in addressing those. And as we've kind of thought about that over the last 15 odd years, we've come to think of a particular approach to thinking about these issues around economic inclusion, which has been the kind of main focus for us. I mean, the first is that there are deep systemic problems that have not found solutions to date, and it's important to we adopted, I'm not sure exactly where the phrase comes from, but it's important to fall in love with the problem and not with the institutions that are addressing the problem. In other words, it's important to support not institutions or organizations, but processes, ideas, initiatives that are helping to solve a particular problem, and remain focused on what does it take to solve that problem. And I'll come to some of the problems that we've been focused on. The second thing is that these large-scale systemic problems require are multi-party, multi-sector parties. These are not problems that get solved by one party, by one business or one funder or by government alone. These are problems that require multi-sectoral, cross-party, multi-funders, and I think the M Plan and the M Fund, I think, is a very good example of an initiative like this. Thirdly, you know, these are initiatives that need scale to shift the system. So impact needs to happen at scale, and finally, they require a long-term mindset. You know, these problems are not solved in 3-year funding cycles. They require many years, if not decades, of constant applied energy and focus and resource. The 4 areas that we've chosen to focus on are areas that we consider to be kind of fundamental in relation to the issue of inclusion, and also issues that where we feel that we've got something to bring. The first has been in school nutrition, where we have a program called Fuel that has been supporting 8 of the provinces to support 4.5 million learners, and it really has been about helping to improve the state's national schools feeding program. So not about setting up parallel structures, but you've got significant resources that are going through that program, and it's about how do we partner with the expertise that we can bring from the private sector to work with government at the provincial and the national level to make that feeding system as effective and as efficient as possible. And we've been running that program for about 15 years. And as I said, about 4.5 million learners are supported through that in partnership with government. The second big area, and I think this is an area that is just central, any focus on inclusion or thinking about big levers to impact on inequality, on poverty, is early childhood development. And what we have done there is partnered with a number of the really big funders and organizations, companies that are focused on ECD, to say, let's try to build one major national program or umbrella program that can support the rollout of ECD facilities across the country, that will support those people, those young 4 and 5-year-olds, around 1 million of them who are not currently in ECD centers. So far we have around, the initiative is called Smart Start. There are around 3,800 of these active franchises. And I think it's a great example of something. It's not just about the outcome for the kids, and it's, obviously it's, fine and gross motor skills, nutrition and so on, but it's also about the opportunity to create, 60,000 work opportunities for young marginalized women across the country through the, building of the social infrastructure. So I think, very important, but again, not something that happens in a short space of time, but we hope that, by 2030, the goal of having all 4 and 5-year-olds in quality ECD support facilities, will be in place. The third area is in education, where we've supported the program to improve learner outcomes run by Murphy Morobi and Mary Metcalf. That's live in over 7,000 schools now. I'm not going to go into the detail of it. They've delivered over 1 million toolkits. But again, working in the school system, working with, I think it was the first program that brought together in KZN, the Department of Education, SADTU, and NAPTOSA, the trade unions, in one initiative to address schooling together. Over 35,000 school officials have been trained through that program. But clearly, and I think it's come up a lot, but education is absolutely kind of central to addressing inclusion and the SDGs. And finally, inclusive employment. We founded with some of our businesses Harambee about 8 years ago, which is about trying to help marginalized, excluded young people transition into income earning opportunities. We've done over 3 million job matches and assessments, 750,000 work seekers have been supported, 170,000 young people put into jobs or work experiences. And we partnered with over 500 businesses to figure out where the demand is for these young people. And then finally, and this is, a kind of key area of this talk, and it was mentioned in the introduction that I'm an ambassador of the Social Justice Initiative. So one thing that we felt very strongly about is the need for South African businesses, organizations, individuals to support social justice organizations and the goals that have been outlined at this summit. There was a particular crisis that occurred when Atlantic Philanthropy left South Africa. They left a huge gaping hole. And I think we're in a terrible position that, the majority of funding for social justice organizations in South Africa historically has come from organizations and individuals, companies outside of South Africa. And so this is something that we've been trying to help to lobby other businesses to build funding for the social justice sector. And so the M Plan and the M Fund, is something that we really welcome. It's a hugely important initiative about building and mobilizing, galvanizing local support for the social justice initiatives, organizations, and the kind of goals that have been articulated at the summit. I'll just say that in closing, there's some critical victories or a lot of the progress that we've made since 94, obviously before 94 and leading up to 94, but since 94, that has been, that the social justice organizations have been responsible for. And I'd like to just, go through a few. Obviously, independent media played a critical role with, Gupta leaks. I like the Washington Post slogan that democracy dies in the dark. I think the media have played a really kind of critical role. Obviously, organizations supporting access to justice, accountability organizations like Corruption Watch and others. Public interest litigation, I just think, is so overlooked in terms of the massive role that it's played, from LGBT organizations, who launched wide-ranging litigation from 1994 to 2007 to support LGBT rights. Obviously the one that we all know, the TAC case on antiretrovirals, the Grootboom housing case, during the state capture years. Obviously the 2016 Nkanda judgment was critical. The Glenister judgments, Helen Suzman Foundation judgments on the independence of the Hawks and the independence of IPID, again, critical. The removal of Intlhamesa and Abrams from the Hawks and Abrams from the NPA. And I think one that's often forgotten, which is the nuclear program that was stopped by SAFCEA and EarthLife Africa. Had those organizations not intervened at the time they did, in the manner they did, we could well be sitting with a $1 trillion infrastructure program here. So I mention all of this because, this has been a big focus for us as well. To address these goals, we need active, vibrant civil society organizations that are funded and supported by local businesses and funders. And these are all, I think, part of what I've been describing, and I think what Lucy spoke to, which is, the critical role that business has to play as a partner to government, to civil society, and other organizations to help advance the social justice and SDG goals that are articulated in this summit. So thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely delighted to have you, Dr. Adrian Anthoven. Thank you so much there for your presentation on a private sector's perspective on bridging the poverty and equality gap. What a fascinating conversation. Remember, we're still in the second annual Social Justice Summit program that runs the rest of the day. And let us know what you have seen, what you have heard, and how interested are you in the conversations we've been holding today at our different social media hashtags. But let me introduce you now to the next speaker, Pastor at Boshoff is the founder and senior pastor of Christian Revival Church. Through his dynamic leadership and passionate, relevant, and unapologetic preaching, he's established the biggest and fastest growing multicultural, multi-generational church in South Africa with over 90 locations nationally and internationally, with more than 70,000 members in Bloemfontein, in Pretoria, and Johannesburg alone. CRC is a local church with a global influence. Pastor At's sermons are also broadcast weekly on the CRC's online church, as well as multiple television networks across the world, bringing a message of hope to the homes of millions of South Africans into the rest of Africa, America, Russia, Israel, and Europe. Through the CRC Cares, they have a transformative footprint in their communities, including the establishment of 22 creches with more than 1,200 children receiving educational programs and daily basic supplies. Through the different CRC Cares feeding schemes, CRC has fed more than 1 million people over the last 6 years alone. CRC is all about souls, passion running with the mandate to win the lost at any cost. Pastor At is a determined leader who fulfills this mandate, believing in a better South Africa where every person matters, where Jesus Christ is King and the church is the hope for the world. Let's welcome him now. Pastor, you may give us your presentation for today.
I greet you in the wonderful name of Jesus Christ, and I want to thank you for the great honor and the great opportunity to be part of this social justice forum, and a lot of love and respect to Advocate Thuli Madonsela, our previous public protector. I admire you, and I thank God that He is using you to put this forum together. I think we all realize that this COVID has taught us that we are facing challenges like never before, and we all have to get busy to address the inequalities and the injustices in our world and society. So the Bible says, and I'm going to talk from the Bible because I do believe that without God in the equation, we will not reform anything and we will not change anything permanently. 87% of our country are professed Christians, and I think even the Muslim brothers and sisters and the other believers, religions, will believe what I have to say today, that our God is a God of justice and that God is against all forms of suffering and pain in society. So today, I'm going to use the word of God to appeal to the Christians out there to take up their responsibility to bring healing to this beautiful country of ours in South Africa. I mean, people are more hopeless than ever. People are in more distress than ever. Suicides are higher than ever. Teenage pregnancies are higher than ever. So in the natural, the picture is not beautiful. Poverty, millions of job losses. But today I want to bring a message of hope, and I believe some proactive solutions as well as how we can address the way forward. I love Advocate Madonsela's vision, alleviate poverty by 2030. I want to get on board with that, and I want to be involved. All our churches, and I believe Christians all over South Africa, we need to get involved to attack and eradicate poverty from our society in Jesus' name. The Bible says in Proverbs 14 verse 34, righteousness exalts a nation. So we know that to reform society and to address the injustices in our communities and in our world, we need everybody on board, including the church and the religious sector. We need the government, we need political parties, we need tertiary institutions like we have today, brilliant minds. We need the financial sector, we need the agricultural sector. We need everybody on board to rebuild South Africa into something beautiful as a post-COVID-19 country. We know that the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. And we also know that if good men say and do nothing, evil will prevail. So I want to talk on the basis of God's word, and I want to challenge people to get involved in eradicating inequality and all forms of injustice. And I really do believe that the church holds a key as the hope of South Africa to give direction and vision. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 17, the Bible says, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, and plead for the widow. Jeremiah 22 verse 3, the Bible says, thus says the Lord, execute judgment and righteousness, and deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Do no wrong and do no violence to the stranger, no xenophobia, the fatherless or widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. Psalm 82 verse 3, the Bible says, defend the poor and the fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy. So the Bible is very clear from the Old Testament to the New Testament that our responsibility is to fight for those that are suffering and to be involved to uplift those that are bound by poverty and the ills that come with poverty. I think sometimes people look at Christianity as a white man's religion, or people look at Christianity as something that is theoretically. Nothing can be further from the truth. Everything about God is justice, social justice, to eradicate poverty, to uplift those that have been left behind. Wealth redistribution, I will show you, is in the Bible. All the answers that we need, the solutions, because we can all find the problems. We know the problems. We can all talk about the problems, but we need more than problems. We need people who can solve the problems, people who can come with proactive solutions, and people who can unite with government, with political parties, with business, with financial institutions. One of the previous speakers said, where's the money going to come from? Well, that's a good question. And I think I want to address that today, because there is money, but the money is not being invested. The money is not being put in the right hands. So we have to mobilize what I believe Christian leaders. And maybe a very great suggestion could be for Advocate Maruzela to call denominational leaders together and to talk about social justice, because these preachers stand up in their pulpits every single Sunday, and we talk to millions and millions and millions of people, and we establish people's core belief and core value. So I think any forum, including our government, and we've had a lot of deliberation with our government, including the president, that thinks they must take the religious sector out of the equation, is making a massive mistake, because the religious sector has tremendous influence in the way that people think, in the way that people will become actively involved in eradicating poverty. As a matter of fact, when you look at Jesus Christ himself, and I'm not preaching today, I do believe that he is the truth, and that he addresses the ills of society. If you study Jesus, the greatest reformer, the greatest leveler, the greatest person who ever spoke about lifting people out of poverty, lifting people out of oppression. If ever there was anybody that reformed society, it was Jesus Christ. And that was during the worst Roman oppression ever. He comes and he brings a message of hope, something that our country really needs. So, and I want to talk about this because I think we get caught up in, we have this picture about church, that church is just a building with a tower and a clock, and people go get a little message. That's not church. Church is the place where God's people are equipped, empowered, and mobilized to go out into society and to address the ills in society. So Luke chapter 4, verse 18, when Jesus talks, he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And the first thing he talks about is to preach the gospel to who? To the poor. And then he talks about healing the broken heart, setting the captives free, setting at liberty those who are oppressed, etc. I've been a pastor 34 years, and let me tell you something. I have learned that while people are bound by poverty, you don't get them free from all the other things. I think out of all of them, poverty is the greatest ill and the greatest giant that we are facing in South Africa. I mean, we have 30 million people live under the breadline. We have people who don't have more than one meal a day. We have people without jobs. That leads to many, many other social issues in our community. Crime, not that there's any excuse. Violence, gender-based violence, not that it is an excuse. Drug abuse, that's on an all-time high during this lockdown. Depression, as one of the professors spoke about, depression is an all-time high. Sicknesses that were not diagnosed because of this COVID lockdown, or God forbid that we go back into a serious COVID lockdown, because there are diseases that will be diagnosed way after this that will have devastating results upon people. Marriages that have gone through divorce, crisis upon crisis upon crisis, because of this isolation, but because of poverty as well. People that are hopeless, people in distress, people sitting next to the road, everyday men who can't find jobs. These are realities. This is the picture of South Africa. And Jesus comes and he addresses this. And I really do believe that if the church would preach the right message and empower the people to do what Jesus instructed us to do, we can eradicate poverty from the face of the earth, and especially from South Africa, who is supposedly a Christian nation. So I want to talk about the Good Samaritan, or the Good South African, where Jesus illustrates responsibility towards our neighbor. That is the gospel that Jesus teaches, that once you are a child of God, you don't live for yourself and your family, you live for everybody. Those who don't have, you give to them. Those who are pushed down, you lift them. And I still find it very, very difficult to comprehend that so many people are still stuck in pre-94 in an apartheid way of thinking, which was a demonic system. Because the church endorsed apartheid. But that's not the message of the gospel. The message of the gospel is one of liberation, one that brings freedom, one that brings hope to people, and one that gives love for humanity. And Jesus talks about this great story. It's not a parable, it's a real story about the man that travels. He's overwhelmed by thieves, he's beaten, he's left by the wayside, he's half dead. He's talking to a very religious man who is saying, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says to him, well, what does the law say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. And he says, and the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. This man, seeking to justify himself, says, who's my neighbor? Because sometimes we live in so much isolation that my neighbor are those who think like me, talk like me, look like me. So we don't even see the rest of the people in the world. And that's why our world is hurting, because we will walk past suffering people for 100 miles to go reach somebody that looks like us and thinks like us. And we're not going to change South Africa this way. And we are not going to alleviate poverty this way through some theoretical, intellectual conversations. We need something much more than that. We need a mass mobilization of people. We need business on board, government on board, the church on board. Get the church's theology sorted out concerning institutional racism, concerning wealth redistribution, concerning land reform, concerning upliftment of those that have been oppressed, etc., etc., etc. Jesus talks about all of this in the Bible. So that's why I cannot go outside of the Bible. I used to live outside of the Bible. It leads you nowhere. But when you come to truth, you understand that when you meet your Creator for real, you find the heart of God for humanity. I mean, I've met many politicians, and like people say about this corrupt prophet, that corrupt prophet, all men of God are corrupt. Then I could say every politician is corrupt, every doctor is corrupt, every lawyer is corrupt. That's just a load of baloney, if I can say it very politely like that. There are many, many, many righteous servants of God, who want to be part of the solution to alleviate poverty and inequality out of our society. I mean, these people sit in our churches. We have people that come from the wealthiest to the poorest, from the most intellectual to the most illiterate. And the reason is the church has to be middle ground where people can meld together and where people can actually get a heart for humanity. So back to the story. I have only a few minutes. So here comes a priest. He sees the need. He looks at the need. He walks to the other side and he just moves on. Next comes a Levite. He sees the same man. He looks at him. He ignores the man, crosses the street, goes the other way. That's been happening too long in South Africa. You don't have to go very far to see people suffering. You don't have to go very far to see people are in trouble. People are hurting. Children are hurting. 7 million orphans in South Africa. Single mothers. 16% of children in South Africa grow with both parents. Well, that's a social problem, because a child that grows up in a home without a father is more likely, 3 times more likely to end up in a prison than a child that has no father. So if we want to address the thing, we have to address the whole package. We have to address the spiritual aspect, the emotional aspect, the financial aspect, the economic aspect, and we have to come with a vision or a blueprint that is all-inclusive. And then there's a Samaritan, somebody from a different culture that sees the need, goes to the person, helps the person, lifts the person, takes the person to an inn, and then pays the bills for that person. So the person can get educated, the person can get skills, the person can be empowered to find a job. So we can't put Christianity in theory. We need much more than theory. We need people now to become the hands and the feet of God in our society. I don't care if you believe in God or not. You are not changing South Africa or this world by taking God out of the equation. It is not happening, because the only one who can change a human heart is God and the love of God. And the only power that will give us any compassion for people and humanity, especially people not like us, is the love of God that is shed abroad in our hearts. This is not preaching. This is life. This is what God came to do. So, Jesus then tells this rich young ruler, he says, go do likewise. What is he saying? He says, be the hand that cares. Be the hand that heals. Be the hand that is open, financially, generous. Be the hand that lifts. I say this to people all the time. I mean, I'm an Afrikaner. I come out of apartheid. I was part of the apartheid system. I'm the only white racist that I've ever met, because every other white person has never been a racist. At least I say I was a racist. God saved me. God got me out of racism. And God spoke to me and said, the hand that oppressed must now be the hand that lifts. So you cannot separate Christianity from social responsibility. That's why I am so adamant and passionate to address this. 87% of our country call themselves Christian. And we are sitting in this situation of inequality, of poverty, of people suffering. What Christianity is that? What Bible are we reading? What gospel are we preaching? When we get the message right in our pulpits and our theology right, that's going to be a huge part of resolving and solving the problems in South Africa. I have no doubt that the church has a major role to play. I understand many people want to take church out of a community. I mean, in the last year, I've sat maybe in 6, 7 different meetings with our president. Firstly, to have to fight about the church having to be essential, and got guidance also from Advocate Maruzela that the church has a vital role to play to uplift people, to alleviate suffering. Yes, we need money, but we need more than money. We need hands, and we need feet, and we need compassion, and we need understanding. We need a strategy. We need a plan. So I want to close. I have 4 minutes to say this. For social justice to take place, number one, we need an inclusive vision. We need a vision that will unite our country. I said this to the president. I said this to Musi Maimane. I said this to Malema. I said this to absolutely everybody. Give a vision where every South African can feel, I fit into South Africa. Because what vision does is vision mobilizes people. Vision gives people responsibility. The minute you exclude me, the minute you threaten me, I'm going to hold on to what I have. So for us to address, and I sit with a lot of government officials and I talk to them about these things. Our business people don't want to reinvest in the country because they're afraid of policies. We want to alleviate poverty. We need to give people security. We need to give people the security that their investments in South Africa will be secure. So every person should be able to ask, where do I fit in? Whether he's a white farmer or a girl in the township. Where do I fit in? Do I fit in South Africa? Am I part of this? I mean, every citizen needs an empowering vision, because without vision, people perish. Then we need to educate people in our country to build a better world for all. Secondly, we need to teach people to see the world they live in. See the world. See the world. Well, I don't know how you're going to see the world without the eyes of God, because inherently people are selfish and greedy. That's why I say, whether you agree with me or not, I've done this too long. We are not going to change people's minds just with a good conversation. We need God to come into people and God to give people a vision and open their eyes to see people, not based on their skin color, not based on their culture, but to have compassion for people, to alleviate the suffering. We need to teach people to see the hurts. That's what Jesus is teaching here. Thirdly, we have to teach people social responsibility. That has to start in primary school, to teach people you have a social responsibility, right through to university. As the Bible says, love your neighbor, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. To whom much is given, much is required. I understand we have many challenges. I understand there's institutional racism. I understand there's inequality. I understand there's problem upon problem, gender-based violence, etc., etc. But we need to come up with proactive solutions like this M plan. I thank God corruption is being addressed, and I'm on the same page on certain things concerning suggestions that I've done for the last 5 years to certain people concerning amnesty on corruption, which we can't talk about now. But I will say this again in closing. We need a vision for South Africa, a vision that unifies everybody. Church, civil society, business, government, there has to be a vision. And the vision should not be politicized. The vision should be for the betterment of all humanity, to uplift and eradicate poverty as goal number one in Jesus' name. Secondly, we need a workable strategy that empowers people into ownership, because to eradicate poverty, we need jobs. So we need to define and address true white capitalism, what it is, and not just throw it out there. We have to address mining industry. We have to revive manufacturing, textile industry, commodities, bring markets back to South Africa, inspire confidence in the business community. I understand urbanization, but we have to empower people that are sitting in homelands as a result of apartheid and get manufacturing to the people, get jobs to the people so we can alleviate poverty. I have no doubt, skills development and training. I have no doubt that we can build and will build a better South Africa if we see humanity through the eyes of God, and if we get a vision that will unite all the people, irrespective of your political belief. We will build a better South Africa of hope and prosperity and peace in the name of Jesus Christ. May God bless South Africa. Amen.
Well, doesn't it just give you a sense of why the Christian Revival Church is so popular and growing all over the world? What a powerful message. What a necessary message. It's been an amazing morning of amazing speakers in academia, in activism, in business, in the social space, in faith, as you've just saw there, with investors and international role players. It's been such an amazing conversation, and we'd like you to continue with that conversation on social media because it really helps keeping the social justice conversation going. Remember our hashtags M5, hashtag SDG10, and relating there to the Sustainable Development Goals, and also hashtag social justice. We're going to take a break now because it's been quite a long morning, but we hope you will stay with us. When we come back, we'll be talking to Gloria Sarobe. She's the chairperson of the Solidarity Fund. You remember Professor Madonsela was speaking about their interactions with them earlier on. She will be speaking to her, but more importantly, we have this conversation with vice chancellors leaders about their role in the social justice space. We hope you will stay with us for that. We'll be back at 1 p.m. after this short break. Thank you so much. See you then. Everyone, thank you so much for staying with us. We're still going on with our program for the day, this one-day second annual Social Justice Summit coming to you from Stellenbosch University. My name is Desiree Jauke, and let me thank once again our hosts for the day, and that is Professor Wim de Villiers, who's the Rector and Vice Chancellor for Stellenbosch University, and also the Minister, well, not the minister really, the Professor Thuli Madonsela, who is the founder of the conference and also the Law Trust Chair in Social Justice and M-Plan convener here at Stellenbosch University, and also Professor Nicholas Smith, the Dean and in the Faculty of Law at Stellenbosch University. It's been quite an interesting morning, some very insightful conversations we've had today, and we're about to have another one as I introduce to you our next speaker of the day. Gloria Sarobe was born in Gugulethu in Cape Town in 1959. She obtained a BCom degree from the University of Transkei and holds an MBA degree from Rutgers University in New Jersey in the USA. She's the founding member of and executive director of WIPHOLD and chief executive officer of WIP Capital. Gloria Sarobe is currently a non-executive chairman of the board at EdCorp, a director at Denel, and a non-executive director at Hans Merensky. She serves, or Hans Merensky rather. She serves on several boards, including Old Mutual, Nedbank, Hans Merensky, Sasol Mining, and Ixia Coal. She is the chairperson of the board of the Independent Ports Regulator. She's also honorary member of the Actuarial Society of South Africa and is a member of SAICA's Advisory Council. She has won numerous awards, including the Businesswoman Association's Corporate Businesswoman of the Year in 2006. And today she's speaking to us as the chairperson of the Solidarity Fund. Ms. Sarobe, thank you so much. It's an honor to have you with us today. You may proceed with your presentation for the day.
Sarobe, the chairman of the Solidarity Fund. I have been privileged enough to be asked by this summit to come and address at least what would look like, how do we relate the Solidarity Fund to what the Social Justice Summit is trying to achieve. And to do that, I have to give a quick background to the Solidarity Fund itself, and then at the end, I will actually link back to how do we see ourselves side by side with the Social Justice Summit. Because of the level of destruction that COVID-19 has caused all over the world in such a short space of time, we can be forgiven to not remember that the first COVID case reported in the world was hardly a year ago, November 17 in China. 3 months later, on the 11th of March 2020, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak as a global pandemic, having observed the devastating effects all over the world, especially in Spain and Italy. By then, South Africa, a week earlier, had experienced its first known case of COVID-19 on 5th of March 2020. 10 days later, 15th of March 2020, President Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act. And on the 23rd of March, the President declared the first lockdown of the country, effective 27th of March. At this point, the President also announced the establishment of the Solidarity Fund, chaired by myself and Deputy Chairman Eddie Eindhoven. The South African government response was nothing short of amazing, and a huge applause and credit by the world, especially the World Health Organization, only had good compliments for South Africa. As an independently run rapid response vehicle created to respond to the COVID-19 epidemic in South Africa, the Solidarity Fund became the platform where South Africans from all walks of life and our international allies could express their support to fight this pandemic. The response has been nothing short of overwhelming. The financial donations given to the fund allowed it to lessen the impact of the pandemic as effectively as possible. We can never thank South Africans enough. 3.2 billion rands in financial contributions from over 305,000 donors, including over 14,000 individuals and 2,640 corporates. Regarding our response, given this leap of good faith from our South Africans and our partners, given that COVID-19 did not discriminate, rich and poor, urban and rural, township and suburbs, our tactical response to each of these communities had to be extremely innovative and to be deliberately inclusive. Our interventions as a Solidarity Fund will always naturally be measured against the Sustainable Development Goals, given that as a country, we are a signatory. SDG are founded on the simple concept of leaving no one behind. We have to integrate the COVID-19 recovery program with the quest to achieve our Sustainable Development Goals. Specifically, goal number 10 speaks at reducing inequalities and poverty. From the very start, it was clear that this pandemic would transcend a health crisis to become an economic, societal, and humanitarian crisis as well. Any national and coordinated response needed to not only address the immediate concerns, but also the resultant and ongoing effects of the lockdown. The Solidarity Fund is steered by its mandate to support the national health response, contribute to the humanitarian relief efforts, and mobilize South Africans to drive a united response to the coronavirus pandemic. In that regard, SDG 10 refers to the issue of human rights and access to essential services and social protection. In effect, the South Africans and its international allies in terms of financial contribution and in-kind donations was in response specifically to this. They felt the country was under siege and needed to be protected, and its people. This meant as a Solidarity Fund, we had to respond with this particular mandate in mind. Working independently of the government, but as additive to their work, the fund's mandate manifests itself in the work the fund does under 3 pillars. The first one is a health response, which seeks to support urgent aspects of the health system response and support and protect frontline health workers. Second pillar is the humanitarian relief, which provides humanitarian support to and strengthening of the most vulnerable households and communities. And the third pillar is the behavioral change, which works to unite the nation in action against COVID-19 and encourage behavior change in local communities. At the very start of the pandemic, the fund was reacting to the needs that were most urgent. Work was heavily focused on assisting the country in ramping up our medical capabilities and supplying medical staff with the equipment such as beds and ventilators and PPE they needed to do their work. The fund also worked to provide immediate humanitarian relief, such as food parcels and supporting organizations that worked in the gender-based violence sphere. As the landscape shifts, however, so must be our approach. The new normal is now a well-worn phrase that has come to refer to the new era when we learn to live with COVID-19. There is no doubt that people do have pandemic fatigue. They are tired of the disruption to their lives and want to move forward. Science has shown, however, that this will be with us for some time, and as such, the role of the fund has shifted slightly to incorporate projects with long-term impact alongside immediate rapid relief. The behavioral change pillar, driven predominantly by the Citizens in Solidarity campaign, is becoming even more important as we aim to keep South Africa safe moving forward. Social justice and the fight against inequality in all its manifestation goes hand in hand. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic raged across South Africa, the country was fighting a battle with unemployment, poverty, and gender-based violence. With the pandemic and the subsequent job losses and uncertainty caused by the lockdown, we are seeing a rise in all of these. The role of the fund is to identify the areas where it can have the biggest impact in slowing down the impact by offering immediate aid. However, the fund also has to seek to balance rapid relief efforts with long-term sustainable interventions. In our role of assisting those affected by COVID-19, taking a long-term view allows us to ensure greater impact. I will give briefly two examples of our long-term relief programs. The first is the fund's once-off farming input voucher. The fund allocated 100 million rands for once-off farming input voucher of 2,000 rands each to be dispersed to 47,000 rural households, 66% of which will be women-led. Subsistence-focused smallholder and household micro-farmers have lost income from a combination of sources during COVID-19 restrictions, such as family remittances from urban areas and income from informal work. This has compromised their ability to fund their ongoing farming activities and the next farming cycle. These subsistence farmers, who are predominantly rural, they play a critical role in household food security. Approximately 75% of these households engage in agriculture to provide extra or supplementary food to their household. These farming input vouchers are a mechanism to assist these farmers to continue their work so that they don't sink further into the poverty trap. Our second example is the fund's gender-based violence interventions. Since the start of the pandemic, there has been an alarming rise in gender-based violence incidents. GBV is the second pandemic that South Africa faces, and the fund quickly identified it as a key work stream in helping the country stem the COVID-19 tide. The first GBV intervention saw 17 million rands dispersed to shelters, the National GBV Command Center, and the comms campaign to enable important places of shelter protection and support to continue working in light of increased demand. The fund has just put out a call for applications for the second intervention, which has an allocation of 75 million rands. This second phase will differ from the first in one crucial way, in that it looks at immediate support as well as addressing systemic investments to drive medium and long-term change. At the start of the global pandemic, memes were shared across social media stating, we are all in the same boat. Those were quickly replaced with more accurate ones that pointed out that we are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. COVID-19 has put a spotlight on the inequalities in the world, but specifically for South Africa, this is a systemic and structural because of our past history. Some of it historically was legislated. For example, communities living in Limpopo and Eastern Cape and rural areas in South Africa are the most vulnerable to poverty. So our interventions as a fund had to be deliberate and specific, taking this into account. I have two examples there, quick examples. When at the beginning there was a need for testing, some parts of South Africa would not have access to testing because of where they are placed. And we then had an arrangement for Transnet, and we are grateful for this, for them to convert their Pelo Paper Health train and convert it into testing stations, two of these trains, one in Eastern Cape and one in Durban, in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. This was to make sure that in the far-flung areas, remote sites next to the railway station, railway tracks, they could have the testing, which ordinarily would be a problem if those Transnet trains were not there. The second kind of intervention, which was quite innovative, once the rural areas were in lockdown, the difficulty of communication became a problem. And so the leaders of these areas could not speak to their communities about all these messages about wash your hands, social distance, isolate, and all of that. And to meet that demand, we actually provided loud hailers for these rural areas, all 882 of them in the country and 9 provinces, so that they can communicate through the loud hailers, because then the social distance is not a problem. I'm giving these particular examples to say that the fund was forced to be innovative given our special situation as South Africa, that we do have these conspicuous inequalities, and which we have to make sure that nobody is left behind. So we have to meet these different lifestyles and demands and the situations where people find themselves. If I were to end, I'll just say that if the Solidarity Fund leaves behind any legacy, I hope it is this, that the work the fund did allowed South Africa to weather the storm and lay the groundwork for the country to rebuild itself through unity and solidarity to create a better and a stronger future. And in that case, we're quite aligned with what the Social Justice Summit is attempting to achieve, which is that make sure all hands on deck, no one is left behind. Thank you very much.